I don't owe you anything. My daughter's words hit me like a physical blow. I stood in my own kitchen, gripping the counter edge while Victoria stared at me with eyes that had gone cold as stone. Her husband Marcus leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, wearing that smirk I had learned to hate over the past 3 years. Behind them, my ex-wife Diane watched silently, offering no defense, no compassion, nothing. Just that familiar look of disappointment she had perfected during our marriage. Victoria, please, I just need a little help with. I started. No, she cut me off sharply. You've been irresponsible your whole life, Dad. I'm not enabling you anymore. Marcus and I have our own family to think about. I wanted to tell her everything right then. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every choice I had made to protect her future. But the words stuck in my throat as I watched her turn toward the door. Marcus followed, still smirking. Diane lingered for just a moment, her expression unreadable, before she too walked away. The front door closed with a sound that echoed through the empty house, like a gunshot. I was alone. They had ripped me off completely. That night, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom and opened an old lockbox I kept hidden in my closet. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a legal folder I hadn't touched in 25 years. The edges were yellow with age, but the documents inside remained perfectly preserved. A trust agreement with my father's signature. A property deed with annotations I had made decades ago. Letters written in my father's careful handwriting, advising me on protecting what mattered most. I remember the day I created this trust like it was yesterday. Victoria had been just 8 years old, crying herself to sleep because her mother and I were divorcing. Diane was already threatening to take everything, hiring the most aggressive lawyer she could find. She wanted the house, the savings, my inheritance from my father, everything. I had sat in a lawyer's office, desperate and terrified, asking what I could do to protect my daughter's future. The answer had been this trust. Complex, carefully structured, completely legal. I had transferred everything into it, making myself nothing more than a temporary guardian of assets that would belong to Victoria when the time came. I had chosen poverty over pride, silence over vindication. I had never told anyone what I had done. Now, reading through the documents again, my eyes stopped on one particular clause. The house legally wasn't mine anymore. The memories flooded back as I sat on my bedroom floor. 25 years ago, Diane had walked into our home with her lawyer and a list of demands. She wanted the house her father had helped us buy. She wanted half of my inheritance that my father had left me just months before his death. She wanted to punish me for whatever failure she believed I was guilty of. I remembered sitting across from her in that mediation room, watching her cold calculation as she divided up our life together. She knew I was vulnerable. My father had just died. I was grieving. I was trying to keep Victoria's life stable while everything crumbled around us. Diane used every advantage she had, but I had made one decision she never knew about. Working with my father's old lawyer, I had quietly transferred all the major assets into a protective trust for Victoria before Diane could touch them. The house, the inheritance, the savings, everything. I became nothing more than a trustee, a guardian without ownership. Legally, I owned nothing. Then I agreed to Diane's divorce terms, giving her what little remained in my name. She had walked away satisfied, believing she had won, but I had protected Victoria's future. The trust had conditions attached, specific requirements designed by my late father to ensure family loyalty and respect. Reading the document now, I realized those conditions had deadlines. The next morning, I made coffee and started going through old financial records. Something had been nagging at me for months. I had been paying a mortgage on this house for 25 years, making payments religiously even when money was impossibly tight. But if the house was held in trust for Victoria, technically I shouldn't have owed anything on it. I pulled out bank statements and property records, spreading them across the kitchen table. Then I saw it. The mortgage payments I had been making were going to an account I didn't recognize. I searched through more documents and found a forwarding agreement I had apparently signed years ago, though I barely remembered doing so. The payments were being redirected. My stomach turned cold. Diane and Marcus knew about this. They had to know. They had been watching me struggle, letting me drain my limited income on payments that benefited them while pretending ignorance. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Buried in my email inbox, in a folder I rarely checked, I found a thread between Diane and Marcus from 3 months ago. They were discussing selling the house. They had already contacted a real estate agent. They were planning to force me out and pocket the money, assuming Victoria would simply agree since she had already cut me off emotionally. They had been planning this behind my back for months. I made a decision that same afternoon. I needed to know how far this conspiracy went. Using an old contact, I learned that Diane and Marcus had scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent that very week. I called in a favor and managed to be present at a nearby table when they arrived, hidden behind a newspaper, but close enough to hear their conversation. Marcus arrived first, confident and loud. This should be straightforward. The old man has no options. Victoria's already done with him emotionally. We just need to formalize the sale. Diane arrived minutes later, settling into her chair with the same calculating expression I remembered from our divorce. He won't fight it. He never fights anything. He's weak. The real estate agent, a young woman with a tablet, nodded along. And you're certain about the ownership documentation? I'll need clear titles to proceed. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. It's complicated, but trust me, we have control. The house is essentially ours through family arrangement. What about the daughter? The agent asked. Is she on board? She will be, Diane said coldly. She's already said she owes him nothing. I felt rage building in my chest, but I stayed perfectly still. Then the agent asked a question that made everyone pause. Where's the trustee? If this is a trust arrangement, I'll need the trustee's signature. Marcus and Diane exchanged uncertain glances. The next morning, I visited Mr. Theodore Brennan, the lawyer who had worked with my father decades ago. His office was exactly as I remembered. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with legal books. He was older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp as ever. I was wondering when you come back, he said as I sat down. I still have your file. Your father made me promise to keep it forever. He pulled out a thick folder, much larger than the documents I had at home. Inside were detailed records of everything. The trust creation, the asset transfers, the conditions my father had insisted upon. Mr. Brennan spread the papers across his desk methodically. You understand what you created here? He asked. You're not the owner of these assets. You're the guardian, the trustee. That means you have responsibilities, but also protections. What kind of protections? I asked. Your daughter, Victoria, is the beneficiary. But the trust your father designed has very specific conditions. If those conditions are violated, the trust can be restructured or even revoked. The assets would revert to you permanently. My hands tightened on the armrests. What conditions? Mr. Brennan began listing them. Maintaining a respectful family relationship, prohibiting financial exploitation of the trustee, requiring annual check-ins to verify well-being, and absolutely no eviction or forced removal of the trustee from trust properties. They violated 3 already, I whispered. Mr. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Do you want to activate the enforcement clause? Mr. Brennan explained the trust conditions in detail. My father, who had built his fortune through careful real estate investments, had witnessed too many families destroyed by greed. When he helped me create this trust, he had insisted on protective clauses that seemed almost paranoid at the time. Now they felt like prophecy. The first requirement was maintaining a respectful family relationship. Not love, not even affection, but basic respect and regular contact. Victoria hadn't spoken to me in 3 months before that kitchen confrontation. She had deliberately cut off all communication. The second requirement prohibited financial exploitation of the trustee. I had been making mortgage payments on a house I didn't legally own, payments that benefited others while I struggled to buy groceries. That qualified as exploitation. The third requirement mandated annual check-ins to verify the trustee's well-being and living conditions. Nobody had checked on me in years. Diane certainly hadn't. Victoria hadn't. They had completely abandoned that responsibility. The fourth requirement was the most serious. No eviction or forced removal of the trustee from trust properties without legitimate cause and legal process. They were already planning to force me out to sell the house. 3 violations, Mr. Brennan confirmed. Possibly 4, depending on how their plans develop. Your father anticipated this exact scenario. The trust has teeth. He slid a document across the desk. It was an activation form. Sign this, and we begin the enforcement process. But I need to warn you, there's no going back. I stared at that document for a long time. Part of me wanted to sign immediately, to activate every protection my father had built into that trust and watch them face the consequences of their cruelty. But another part of me, the part that stayed silent through my divorce, that had chosen sacrifice over confrontation, hesitated. What if I wait? I asked Mr. Brennan. He raised an eyebrow. Wait for what? To see how far they'll go. To document everything. To make sure there's no question about their intentions. Mr. Brennan leaned back, a slight smile crossing his face. You want to play the long game. Let them dig their own hole deeper. Exactly. He nodded slowly. That's strategic, but it's also risky. They could do real damage before we step in. I've survived 25 years of damage, I said. I can survive a few more weeks. So I left his office without signing, but with a plan. I would pretend to be exactly what they believed I was: weak, defeated, powerless. I would tell Victoria I would figure something out, that I wouldn't be a burden. I would make them feel safe, make them lower their guard completely. That evening, I called Victoria. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cold and impatient. What do you want, Dad? I just wanted to say I'm sorry for putting pressure on you. You're right. I need to figure things out on my own. A pause. Then her voice softened slightly. I appreciate that. It's not personal, Dad. It's just that Marcus and I have to think about our future. I understand completely. I lied. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure campaign began subtly. First, I noticed the locks on the front door had been changed. I came home from a grocery run to find my key wouldn't work. I had to call Victoria, who acted surprised and claimed it was for security reasons, but reluctantly gave me a new key. Then the utilities started having problems. The internet was disconnected without warning. When I called to restore it, the company said the account holder had requested cancellation. The account holder was Diane, apparently still listed on some old paperwork. It took days to get it reconnected under my name. The water heater mysteriously stopped working. I called for repairs, but was told that authorization was needed from the property owner. Victoria said she would handle it, but weeks passed with no action. I took cold showers and documented every call, every text message, every excuse. Marcus started showing up unannounced, walking through the house like he was inspecting property he already owned. He would comment on repairs needed, on how much the place was worth, on what we should do with it. I said nothing, just nodded, and let him talk while I recorded every visit in a journal. Then came the official eviction notice. It arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning. The legal letterhead was crisp and threatening. It gave me 30 days to vacate the premises, citing family reorganization of assets and mutually agreed transfer of residence. I had never agreed to anything, but I took the notice to Mr. Brennan, and together we prepared our response. The eviction hearing was set for early October. I arrived at the courthouse alone, carrying nothing but a thin folder. Victoria and Marcus were already there with Diane and their lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. They barely glanced at me as I took my seat on the opposite side of the room. The judge, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses, reviewed the initial paperwork with a bored expression. This was probably just another routine family dispute to her. Victoria's lawyer stood and began presenting their case. I was living in a property that needed to be managed by the actual family. I had agreed to temporary arrangements that had expired. I was being difficult about reasonable requests for access and control. It was all lies, smoothly delivered. The judge nodded along, making notes. Then it was my turn. Mr. Brennan stood slowly, his age evident in the careful way he rose from his chair. But when he spoke, His voice carried the weight of decades of legal experience. Your Honor, I believe there's significant misunderstanding here about property ownership and legal authority. He approached the bench and submitted our folder. The judge opened it, and I watched her expression change as she read. Her bored attachment vanished, replaced by sharp attention. "This is a trust document?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor. Created 25 years ago and properly filed with all relevant authorities." The judge read more, her frown deepening. Then she looked up at Victoria's lawyer. "Did you know about this trust?" Victoria's lawyer stood frozen, clearly caught off guard. She glanced at Diane and Marcus, both of whom looked equally confused. "Your Honor, we were informed this was a straightforward family property matter." The judge set down the documents with deliberate care. "This is far from straightforward. I'm ordering a full investigation into property ownership, trust validity, and the appropriateness of this eviction attempt. All proceedings are suspended until this investigation is complete." She looked directly at Victoria, who had gone pale. "You're attempting to evict the trustee of your own trust? Did you even know you were a trust beneficiary?" "I don't understand," Victoria stammered. Clearly, the judge's tone was sharp. "I suggest you speak with your father's attorney immediately. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel struck, and the room erupted in confused whispers. Marcus grabbed Victoria's arm, pulling her toward the exit while Diane followed, her face tight with anger. I sat quietly as they left, waiting for the room to clear. 3 days later, Victoria received a certified letter from Mr. Brennan's office. It was marked urgent and required her signature. I knew what it contained: a complete explanation of the trust, its history, its conditions, and the violations that had been documented. She called me that evening, her voice shaking. "Dad, I need to talk to you, face to face." "Talk to the lawyer first," I said calmly. "Then we'll talk." She booked an emergency appointment with Mr. Brennan for the following morning. Mr. Brennan later told me what happened in that meeting. Victoria had arrived alone, having insisted Marcus wait in the car. She sat across from his desk looking young and frightened, nothing like the cold woman who had cut me off weeks earlier. "Tell me what's happening," she had said. "Tell me everything." So Mr. Brennan did. He explained how 25 years ago, when she was just 8 years old, her grandfather and I had created a trust to protect her future. How I had transferred my inheritance, the house, and all significant assets into that trust rather than let them be divided in the divorce. How I had chosen to become legally poor to ensure she would be secure. He showed her the documents. Her grandfather's letters, written in his shaking handwriting during his final illness, explaining why family loyalty mattered more than wealth. My signatures on transfer paperwork, giving up ownership of everything. The mortgage payment records showing I had supported her trust property for 25 years while living on nothing. "Your father sacrificed everything," Mr. Brennan had told her. "He lived in near poverty, worked jobs below his education level, struggled constantly, and he never told you because he didn't want you to feel guilty or obligated." Victoria had started crying. "Why didn't he ever say anything?" "Because he loved you more than his pride." But when she came home that evening, Marcus was waiting with a different narrative. "He's manipulating you emotionally. This trust story is just his way of controlling you. Can't you see that?" The next few days were chaos. Diane called Victoria repeatedly, reinforcing Marcus's interpretation. "Your father was always manipulative. He probably created this trust to hold things over your head forever. Don't fall for his guilt trip." Victoria wavered. I could see the conflict in her eyes when she looked at me. Part of her wanted to believe in the sacrifice I had made. But another part, the part that had been married to Marcus for 3 years, that had reconnected with her mother after the divorce, that part couldn't reconcile this new information with the story she had been told about me her whole life. In her mind, I had always been the weak one, the one who couldn't hold on to his wife, the one who lived small and struggled financially, the one who disappointed everyone. Accepting that I had chosen this life, that I had sacrificed everything deliberately, would mean rethinking everything she believed. Marcus pushed harder. "If this trust is real, we need to challenge it. It's obviously outdated and restrictive. We'll get our own lawyer and contest the whole thing." Diane agreed immediately. 25 years is too long. Legal standards have changed. We can break it. So they hired another lawyer, this one specifically chosen for aggressive tactics. He reviewed the trust documents and scheduled depositions. Victoria signed paperwork authorizing the challenge without fully understanding what it meant. They were doubling down on their original plan, just with different legal strategies. I watched it all happen and did nothing except document everything. Every meeting they held without inviting me. Every decision made about MY Life and MY Trust without consulting me. Their new lawyer was named Frank Desmond, and he had a reputation for winning impossible cases through sheer aggression and finding technical loopholes. He demanded meetings with Mr. Brennan, examined every page of the trust documents, and looked for any flaw that could be exploited. 2 weeks later, he called Victoria and Diane to his office for what they assumed would be good news. Marcus insisted on coming too, already mentally spending the money they would receive once the trust was broken. But Frank Desmond's expression was grim when they arrived. I reviewed everything thoroughly. The trust is airtight. Whoever drafted these documents was exceptionally skilled and anticipated virtually every challenge. There has to be something, Diane insisted. There isn't. The trust was properly filed. All legal requirements were met, and most importantly, the conditions built into it are completely enforceable under current law. Challenging this would cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and would almost certainly fail. So, what do we do? Marcus demanded. Frank Desmond looked at them steadily. You accept reality. The trust stands. Your husband and father sacrifices legal ownership to protect your daughter's inheritance, and that sacrifice is ironclad. They left his office in angry silence. But the car ride home was apparently explosive. Victoria later told me that Diane spent the entire drive blaming her, saying she had been too aggressive in cutting me off, that she had ruined their leverage by being cruel when they should have been strategic. Marcus just drove in silence, his jaw clenched. The cracks in Victoria and Marcus's marriage started showing immediately. Over the next few days, I noticed Marcus was short with Victoria, irritable and distant. He worked late more often and stopped asking about her day. Victoria tried to keep up appearances, but I could see the strain. She had moved back in with me temporarily after the failed legal challenge, claiming she needed time to think. Marcus had stayed in their apartment, saying he needed space. One evening, about a week after the lawyer's devastating news, I was in the kitchen when I heard Marcus arrive. He didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place, though his confidence seemed forced now. We need to talk about next steps, he said to Victoria, not even acknowledging my presence. We can't just accept this. There has to be another way to force him out and sell this place. Marcus, the lawyer was clear. I don't care what the lawyer said. Your father has been playing victim for decades, and now he's using some legal trick to keep controlling everything. It's not a trick, Victoria said quietly. You heard, Mr. Brennan. My grandfather and my dad created this to protect me. Protect you or control you? Marcus's voice rose. Wake up, Victoria. This whole thing is about him maintaining power over your life. Their argument continued in the living room while I quietly finished washing dishes. But what Victoria didn't know was that I had suggested she record conversations with Marcus. That evening, she had her phone in her pocket with voice recording activated. The recording was devastating. Marcus, thinking Victoria had gone to the bathroom, had called someone. Victoria's phone captured everything from where she had left it on the living room table. Yeah, it's a complete disaster, Marcus said to whoever was on the other end. The old man somehow locked up everything in this trust situation. No, I know. I thought she'd have access to everything when we got married. I'm trying to figure out my exit strategy. I'm not staying in this mess if there's no payoff. Victoria stood frozen in the hallway, listening through the wall. The person on the phone must have asked about Victoria because Marcus laughed bitterly. She's useful as long as there's money attached. But if this trust thing means we're stuck with nothing, I'm not wasting more years on this. Yeah, I already looked into divorce filing requirements. Just waiting to see if there's any way to salvage this first. Victoria had walked back into the room then, her face completely blank. Marcus had looked up, caught off guard, trying to determine if she had overheard. She had smiled at him, said she was tired, and went upstairs. But she downloaded the recording immediately. The next morning, after Marcus left for work, she came to find me in the garage where I was organizing old boxes. "Dad," she said quietly, holding out her phone, "you need to hear something." I listened to the entire recording. When it finished, I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were red but dry, like she had cried herself out during the night. "I was so stupid," she whispered. I pulled her into a hug, the first real one in years. We sat at the kitchen table for hours that morning, just talking, really talking, for the first time since she was a teenager. Victoria told me everything. How Marcus had seemed so successful and stable when they first met, how he encouraged her to reconnect with Diane after years of minimal contact, how gradually he had started making comments about my failures and weakness. "He isolated me from you," she realized. "Slowly, over 3 years, he convinced me you were a problem. He saw the potential inheritance." I said gently, "That's all he ever wanted." She broke down then, really crying. "I said such horrible things to you. In the kitchen that day, when I told you I didn't owe you anything, you didn't know the whole story. But I should have known you. I'm your daughter. I should have known you wouldn't just be irresponsible and helpless. That's not who you are. That's not who you ever were." I held her hand across the table. "I forgive you, Victoria. I forgave you the moment you said it. But forgiveness didn't mean the process would stop. The trust review hearing was already scheduled. The investigation was ongoing, and the documented violations were extensive. I explained to Victoria that the legal process had to continue, not for revenge, but to ensure the trust protections remained intact. "I understand," she said. "Whatever needs to happen, I deserve it." The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. In the meantime, Victoria filed for legal separation from Marcus. Diane appeared at my door 2 days after Victoria filed separation papers. She looked older than I remembered, stress lines deep around her mouth and eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into the house. "We need to talk." Privately, I led her to the living room and waited. Diane paced for a moment before turning to face me. "Fix this," she demanded. "Tell the lawyers this was all a misunderstanding. Withdraw whatever complaints you filed. Let's just reset everything and move forward." "Move forward how?" I asked calmly. "We'll be civil. We'll respect boundaries. Victoria will maintain appropriate contact with you. Just stop this legal process before it destroys everything." "Everything?" I repeated. "Or just your comfortable arrangement?" Her face flushed. "Don't act righteous with me. You're doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because you tried to steal from your own daughter. You tried to force me out of a house held in trust for Victoria's benefit. You violated every condition my father put in place to protect family. Your father was a controlling old man who didn't understand modern families. He understood people who value money over relationships. He understood exactly what he was dealing with." Diane's expression shifted, calculating. "If you continue this process, I'll tell Victoria everything. Every secret from our marriage. Every reason I left you. Every weakness you tried to hide." I stood up slowly. "Tell her whatever you want, Diane. She already knows the truth about what kind of person you are. The lawyer confirmed everything about how you tried to take everything in the divorce, how you drained savings accounts while I was planning my father's funeral. The truth about my divorce had stayed buried for 25 years, protected by legal settlements and mutual agreements not to disparage each other. But Mr. Brennan had kept detailed records from that time, including evidence I had chosen not to use because I wanted to shield Victoria from the ugliest parts of her parents' separation. Now, with Diane threatening to create false narratives, Mr. Brennan released those records as part of the trust review investigation. Bank statements showing Diane had emptied our joint savings account the week after my father died, while I was still arranging the funeral. Email printouts where she discussed her affair with a colleague started months before she asked for divorce. Financial documents showing she had hidden assets while claiming poverty during settlement negotiations. The evidence was submitted to the court as context for understanding the original trust creation. It showed why my father had insisted on protections, why I had been willing to sacrifice legal ownership, why we had both anticipated exactly this kind of exploitation. Diane tried to stop the release, filing emergency motions about privacy and irrelevant information. But the judge ruled that it was material to understanding whether trust violations had occurred and what the original intent of the trust had been. Victoria read everything. She sat in my living room with printed documents spread across the coffee table, her face growing paler with each page. She cheated on you? Victoria's voice was small. While Grandpa was dying? Yes. And you never told me. You were 8 years old. Then you were 10, then 15, then 20. There was never a right time, and I wanted you to have a relationship with your mother. The trust review hearing was held in a larger courtroom than the eviction attempt had been. This time, there were court reporters, multiple lawyers, and a more senior judge. Victoria sat beside me on one side. Diane and Marcus sat separately on the other side, no longer presenting a united front. Mr. Brennan presented our evidence systematically. Documented violations of trust conditions, proof of exploitation attempts, records of harassment and intimidation, evidence of attempted fraud through the eviction process. He submitted the recordings of Marcus's phone call. He presented the mortgage payment records showing 25 years of financial sacrifice. The opposing lawyer had almost nothing to counter with. They tried to argue that the trust conditions were outdated, that modern family relationships were more complex, that my violations of being a difficult trustee justified their actions. But the judge cut them off repeatedly, clearly unimpressed. Then came witness testimony. Victoria was called first. She testified about her changing understanding of the situation, her regret over how she had treated me, and her recognition that Marcus had manipulated her perception of her own father. Diane was called next. Under oath, she struggled to explain her actions. Yes, she had known about the trust. Yes, she had helped plan the eviction. Yes, she had encouraged Victoria to cut me off. No, she couldn't explain why she thought any of this was appropriate given the trust's clear conditions. Marcus refused to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The judge reviewed everything in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, she spoke. I'm prepared to issue my ruling. The judge's voice was firm and clear. This case represents a profound betrayal of family trust and legal obligations. The evidence shows systematic exploitation of a trustee who sacrificed his own financial security for his daughter's benefit. She looked directly at Diane and Marcus. You both attempted to manipulate and profit from a trust you didn't create and had no right to control. Your actions constitute clear violations of the trust conditions. Then she announced her decision. All assets connected to the trust were frozen immediately. Diane lost access to any accounts or properties she had gained influence over. Marcus was barred from any involvement in trust matters. Financial penalties were assessed against both of them for attempted fraud. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering a restructuring of the trust terms to prevent future exploitation. The trustee will receive enhanced protections and greater authority over trust management. Victoria sat rigid beside me, processing everything. Marcus stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Diane remained seated, her face ashen. Within a week, Marcus had filed for divorce from Victoria. His lawyer made it clear they were seeking a clean split with minimal assets. Marcus wanted out quickly, before any of the trust situation could complicate his finances further. Victoria told me later that she felt relieved more than hurt. I can see now what he was, what they both were. Diane's life unraveled faster than I had anticipated. Her social circle, many of whom had attended the hearing or heard about it, began distancing themselves. Her attempt to paint herself as a victim found little sympathy. The collapse was total. Marcus left Victoria with barely a conversation, moving out of their apartment while she was at work and leaving only a note. His divorce filing claimed irreconcilable differences, but everyone who knew the situation understood the truth. He had only wanted money, and once that avenue closed, he had no more use for my daughter. Diane tried to maintain her lifestyle, but without access to resources she had been siphoning from the trust situation, her expenses quickly exceeded her income. She sold her car and downsized to a smaller apartment. Her friends, who had enjoyed her generous hosting and expensive gifts, suddenly had less time for her. The social consequences were perhaps harder on her than the financial ones. People whispered in grocery stores. Former friends avoided her at community events. The truth about what she had tried to do, documented in public court records, became common knowledge. Victoria moved back into the house completely, taking her old bedroom. We established new routines. Breakfast together on weekends, grocery shopping trips, quiet evenings watching television. It wasn't perfect. Years of distance couldn't be erased in weeks. But we were rebuilding. She started therapy to process everything. The divorce from Marcus, her complicated feelings about Diane, her guilt over how she had treated me. I encouraged her to take all the time she needed. "I don't deserve your patience," she said one evening. "You deserve a chance to heal," I replied. "That's what the trust was always about, giving you chances." The final trust transfer decision was approaching. Mr. Brennan had prepared new documents reflecting the judge's restructuring order. Rebuilding trust, I learned, was slower and harder than building it the first time. Victoria and I met with a family therapist twice a week. In those sessions, we talked about everything. Her childhood memories of the divorce, her relationship with Diane, her 3 years with Marcus, her feelings about discovering the truth about the trust. "I think I always knew something was wrong," she admitted during one session. "With Marcus. But it was easier to believe their version where you were the problem. Taking responsibility meant admitting I had hurt you for years. You were manipulated by people who should have protected you," the therapist pointed out. "But I'm an adult. I made choices. We worked through it slowly. I set boundaries, something I had never done before. I explained that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, that rebuilding our relationship meant she had to consistently demonstrate changed behavior, not just apologize." Victoria accepted this. She got a job, her first in 2 years, wanting to establish her own financial independence rather than relying on trust assets. She started paying rent, which I put into a savings account for her, though she didn't know that. She called Diane once, a conversation I wasn't privy to. Afterward, Victoria told me she had established firm boundaries with her mother. Minimal contact, no discussion of finances, no manipulation attempts. Diane had responded poorly, trying to guilt Victoria about abandoning her. Victoria had held firm. "I'm done being manipulated," Victoria said, "by anyone." The final trust transfer decision was scheduled for early December. Mr. Brennan had prepared the new structure, which would give me full control, while still preserving Victoria's eventual inheritance. The final decision meeting was held in Mr. Brennan's office rather than a courtroom. It was quieter, more personal. Victoria and I sat together on one side of his large desk. The documents were spread before us. "The judge's order gives us flexibility in how to restructure," Mr. Brennan explained. "We can maintain the original trust structure with modifications, or we can dissolve it entirely and create a new arrangement." He looked at me. "What do you want?" I had thought about this constantly since the hearing. The trust had protected Victoria's inheritance for 25 years. It had survived divorce, manipulation attempts, and legal challenges. But it had also created distance between us, allowing secrets to fester. "I want transparency," I said. "No more hidden protections. Victoria should know exactly what exists and why." Mr. Brennan nodded and began explaining the new structure. The house would be transferred fully to my name, giving me complete legal ownership and ending the trustee arrangement that had left me vulnerable. Victoria would retain her inheritance through other trust assets, but managed through a standard trust she could access at 35. "Your daughter will receive her full inheritance," Mr. Brennan assured Victoria. "But your father will have security and control over his own living situation." "That's fair," Victoria said immediately. "More than fair, given everything." The papers were signed. Diane and Marcus received nothing. Their names removed from all documents. The house became legally mine for the first time in 25 years. Afterward, Victoria and I walked out together into the winter afternoon. "You protected me my whole life," she said quietly, "even when I didn't deserve it." 6 months after everything settled, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and looked out at the backyard I had maintained for decades. The house was legally mine now, but more importantly, my relationship with my daughter was real again, built on honesty instead of hidden sacrifice. Victoria had her own apartment now, but she visited every Sunday for dinner. We talked about everything: her new job, her therapy progress, her tentative attempts at dating again. She was building a life based on her own choices and hard work, not on expectations or manipulation. Diane reached out occasionally through carefully worded emails, always asking for something: money, help, reconciliation. Victoria responded with firm boundaries. I didn't respond at all. Marcus was remarried within 6 months to someone rumored to have significant family wealth. Victoria had laughed when she heard. At least he's consistent. I used some of the trust restructuring settlement to establish college scholarships in my father's name. He would have appreciated that, helping young people who understood the value of sacrifice and persistence. The rest went into secure investments for a retirement I could finally plan for without fear. People ask me sometimes if I regretted how things had unfolded, if I wished I had told Victoria about the trust earlier, if I felt vindictive about the consequences Diane and Marcus faced. I didn't regret my choices. The sacrifice had been necessary, even if the path had been harder than anticipated. Telling Victoria earlier would have burdened her with guilt she shouldn't have carried, and I felt no vindication in others' suffering, only relief that the truth had emerged before more damage was done. I didn't win by destroying them. I won by refusing to let them destroy me.